question, please.
Okay, hello, my name is Bushra Araji. I was previously
Could you speak up, please?
Yes. My name is Bushra Araji, and I was previously a student of Professor Paul Salim at the AUB. I had a question. I had a question about you all talked about the spheres of influence, mostly Iran, the GCC countries, and Turkey. Now, my question, what are the prospects, because there is not enough media coverage of what's happening on the ground in the even the smaller GCC countries, in terms of freedom movements or any prospect of that? And if there is such a prospect of freedom movements in the GCC countries of gaining more ground, how does that change the spheres of influence and, you know, your projections for the future of the area? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Jamal, if you could take sort of Saudi-Turkish relationship and also Saudi Arabia and Syria, and then the other panelists can address Syria post-Assad.
From what I heard from Saudi officials, they like the relationship we have with Turkey. They see it as a model relationship. I even heard once a Saudi official saying, we wish Iran would intervene in the Arab world the same way Turkey does. When Erdogan comes to Saudi Arabia, he brings half of the plane will be full of Turkish businessmen. We wish the Iranians would do the same thing and have that kind of a relationship. Yeah, Saudi Arabia appreciates the relationship with Turkey. They will be, let's not speak about alliance or, but there are cooperation. I'm sure there are all kinds of cooperation between both countries and others, particularly in the issue of Syria. And it is required for them to work and cooperate, whether openly or secretly or about the Syrian, because there got to be some secret matters about Syria, intelligence work together. But there is a trust. And besides, many of the Turkish officials, they know Saudi Arabia well. They lived, for the president of Turkey lived in Saudi Arabia for about 6 years when he was working for IDB, Islamic Development Bank. So they are quite, they are friends to Saudi Arabia. Erdogan himself has many personal relationships with Saudis. So Turkey is not seen as a threat. Some Arab writers would talk about the Turkish threat and the Iranian threat, but no, it is not that at all. It's a very positive relationship we have with Turkey. Is Saudi Arabia in the shadow when it comes to Syria? No, it is not. Whatever the Qataris are doing, they must be doing it with, in consultation with the big brother, with Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is very much in the picture. Okay, at the beginning of the crisis, Saudi Arabia was reluctant, but when the killing continued, the pictures continued to come out of Syria, and then there was a very wrong telephone call between Bashar and the Saudi HRH, which got Saudi Arabia very angry. And that shifted completely the position of Saudi Arabia and made it very much for the regime change. And that is the Saudi position right now. It is for regime change. But just Saudi Arabia, just like another country, we just don't know how to do it. It is, and I'm sure that is not only Saudi Arabia. Every other country, including Turkey, France, they want regime change, but just how to do that.
5 years from now or 10 years from now, if we have this meeting again, you're going to see that the Turkish model that everybody is talking about is not going to be replicated anywhere in the Arab world. Turkey is a very unique case, and I think there is a great deal of exaggeration about the attractiveness of it in the Arab world. There might be attractiveness, but we are not ready for that kind of model in the Arab world, nor the Arab world is ready for the Iranian model. We are trying to get rid of that model ourselves in Iran. So there is, don't worry about that part of it. Second point I want to make, I think it is very important for this audience to know that there are more Shias in the Persian Gulf than there are Sunnis, by far more Shias. Yes, there are divisions between Persians and Arabs, but these are not important divisions. Finally, regarding whether the world will accept Assadism without Assad. Of course, the West would prefer a system that is completely different than what it is today. But the reality is that without some degree of support from the existing system, without some degree of keeping the system intact, Syria could enter into a major civil war, as dangerous as what we saw in Iraq. I think people who keep talking about replacing Assad should also think about the next day, what's going to happen after Assad is overthrown. We made that mistake back in 1979 when we said we want to get rid of the Shah, and we believed anything would be better. Well, we have to revise that. We made the same mistake in Iraq. We thought once we get rid of Saddam, everything is going to be gloomy. Therefore, I think the world might have no choice but to accept some sort of Assadism without Assad. But that's too early to judge.
Paul and Abdelkhalik, do you want to comment on the Arab view of the Turkish model?
Well, yeah, I mean, quickly, I mean, of course, one shouldn't exaggerate it as a model, as if it's a fully elaborated thing, but certainly in Tunisia and in Egypt, in fact, both Nahda and Muslim Brotherhood and other parties are seeing the Turkish example of having a multi-party democracy. In Turkey, it's a secular state. In Egypt and Tunisia, they're calling it a civil state, with a large role for a party with Islamic roots, as long as it becomes more pragmatic, more globalized in its policies, and more responsible and responsive and democratic. That combination of things is certainly being paid attention to in Tunisia and Egypt, and if they succeed, as was mentioned in the panel this morning, I think that will have demonstration effects elsewhere. I think the challenge for Tunisia and Egypt, particularly for Egypt, is simply the challenges of the political life of Egypt, and more importantly, the economic challenges that any Egyptian government is going to face. No matter what political model is put in place in Egypt, no government is going to solve Egypt's economic problems in the next 5 years. So they're going to have to be dealing with a pretty serious backlash. But I do think that in this initial phase, the Turkish example is powerful and will be tried without exaggerating it too much. On the issue that Bushra asked about the GCC and political change, I think it just raises a broad issue, which is that since 1970, in effect, there's been, one must say, consensus among Arab governments in a way about governance, which, after the Arab Cold War of the 50s and 60s between the socialist model, socialist Arab nationalist model, and the conservative monarchical model, which led to wars in Yemen and conflicts and coup d'etat in many countries. After the 67 war, after the death of Nasser, we went into effectively a number of decades where there was no real disagreement among the rulers or the systems. We are now beginning to enter a period. If some of these democracies succeed, there will be fundamental contradictions of political systems and parties and leaderships. If Tunisia and Egypt make it, contradiction between that and Saudi Arabia and the way it's taking things. So right now we do see a kind of a honeymoon period, but we might enter a more critical phase. The GCC itself, made up of 6 countries, 4 of those have politics. And those are Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. Qatar and Emirates don't really have politics. Their populations are so tiny. And in all of the 4, there have been major rumblings. Kuwait just yesterday had a huge set of events. Saudi Arabia has had many stresses and strains. Oman as well, and Bahrain, obviously. So the GCC is not at all immune to political change, even though they have massive economic resources to buy time.
Thank you. Abdelkhalik, did you want to comment?
No.
All right, let's just take one last question. We're running out of time.
Okay. My name is Albert Nikemkin, a consultant. I have a very simple question. As I was listening to your wide-ranging review of the region, I was struck by the fact that no one at any point during the day has mentioned Algeria, and I wondered if anyone on the panel had a comment on an influence of the Arab awakening on Algeria.
Thank you very much.
I would, if I may, just briefly. I think there are major countries which might still be impacted. Algeria is obviously one of them, Morocco is another, and Saudi Arabia is a third. These are three big countries in terms of their population. Algeria certainly had similar conditions to Tunisia and Egypt, except that it had a lot of energy resources also to buy time in a recent history of civil war. I do think, as my colleague Abdel Khalek described in a previous conference, that we're in the first 5 minutes of the Arab Spring. There's still a lot to come. And what's happened in the last 10 months is a sea change in the way people think. Now, between changing how they think to getting organized and doing things in different countries, the years ahead will tell us. But Morocco, Algeria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, big countries that are not on the right side of history.
Well, and we still haven't talked about Libya. Does anybody want to speculate about Libya, expectations for Libya? Dr. Abdel Khalek? Jamal?
I will not speculate about Algeria first.
Okay.
I think the Algerians' population are still recovering from what they call al-Ashriyat al-Sawda, the 10 dark years, where they suffered a small, it really wasn't that small. They had a civil war where about 100,000 people died, massacres from all sides. The army and the militants, they were all killing each other and butchering villagers. The Algerians haven't recovered from that. And there are all reasons for revolutions in Algeria as much as in Egypt or Tunisia or Libya. Corrupt regime, the military is not only in control of the government, it is in control of the economy. It is a very feudal system in Algeria where senior military officials and their relatives, they divide the country the same way the family of Ben Ali was dividing Tunis and sharing Tunis to its own interest. But it is that decade of civil war. They just come out from a few years ago, and it is probably in their back burner, in their mind, and they fear those things will, those incidents could happen again if they start demanding for their freedom. Let's remember that in 1988, Algeria witnessed the first phase of the Arab Spring. It was as much as, it was very, if it was broadcasted to CNN or Al Jazeera, we would see the same pictures we saw coming from Egypt and Syria in 1988. They were young people in Algeria demanding freedom, equality, and they had they ran a brief course of democracy which lasted until January 1991, and then the military came in and canceled the elections, and that opened the gates to hell and to that civil war they had in Algeria.
Well, I hope you all remain for our final panel of the day, Development Strategies for a New Middle East. Now please join me in thanking this excellent group of